Today, I want to talk about an important and maybe for some people a bit boring topic, but I think it's really important. And I want to emphasize also up front, this is not splitting hair, and this is not just about technicalities. This is really important for your cost of living, because in the end, taxes are part of your cost of living. They're kind of like a rent that you have to pay to be allowed to work somewhere, from some country, from some city, and so on. It also shows in the fact that the very attractive places in the world, they tend to have higher taxes simply because they can afford it on the one hand, and also because they are typically a bit older, so they have sort of a larger mountain of things that have aggregated over time, increasing your tax bill. I'm Raphael. I'm your expert for relocation, especially if you're a software developer. I'm happy to help you, or if you're some other kind of techie, because there's a lot of stuff you can optimize about your quality of living, your cost of living, and also your taxes, banking, and insurance that you might not be aware of yet. So what do I mean by you probably pay much more taxes than you actually think you do? Very often I hear people say things like, oh, I just pay 20% of taxes, which is really low because I have this really nice setup, or I live in this really nice country with a flat tax, and so on. Or I pay almost zero tax because I'm offsetting it with some losses from somewhere else, or I don't have such a high income, etc., whatever the reason is. And typically these numbers are kind of wrong. And they're wrong because most people, they define the word tax and basically the formula for the amount of tax that they really pay, they define it wrong. They only focus on income tax, corporation tax, profit tax, stuff like that. And while that, yes, it's a part of your tax, it's typically only a fraction of the actual amount of tax you end up paying. Because in addition to these so-called direct taxes, the ones that you see more or less directly because they're on some kind of a income statement, tax receipt, and so on. On top of that, there's basically two more really important categories of taxes, or if you will, tax-like deductions or costs that you actually end up having, be it as an employee, but it could also be as a freelancer, or even as a typical small to medium-sized entrepreneur. I'm not going to talk about corporations. For corporations, the whole game is a bit different. You are probably not a corporation if you're watching this video anyways, so this video is really for you if you're a normal person or a normal freelancer, a small business, where basically what I'm going to say will apply. All right, so next to income tax, profit tax, corporation tax, and so on, the most important thing you have is Social Security. And the real problem here is that many people, they pretend as if Social Security was sort of like a savings account or an investment. And that is quite wrong. It's not, maybe not 100% wrong, but I would say it's like 80% wrong. Really, if you look at typical Social Security, what is that? It's unemployment insurance, it's maybe your pension fund or multiple types of pension systems at the same time. It's maybe some kind of a fund for child benefits, where you get money back from the government once you have children or when they go to school, and so on. So the reason why people think of it this way is because it's not called tax. So they think, obviously, if it's not called tax, then it must be something different. But if you think of it, tax means you pay to some system, be it the government or some association, some club, etc., where you pay something into the system and you don't necessarily get the same amount of money back over time. And you also have very little control over what actually happens with that money, right? If it were different, then maybe you could argue it's more like an investment. If you invest in a company, yeah, maybe you lose all your money because the company goes bankrupt, but at least typically you have a say over what is happening. The investment is voluntary, maybe you're shareholders, so you have voting rights, and so on. If you pay into a Social Security system, then typically you have no voting rights or negligible voting rights. You also maybe don't get anything back, and it doesn't really feel like an investment. It's typically also not voluntary, right? You can't just say, okay, I'm going to put money into this system because I believe in it, but instead you're typically forced to just pay into the system, like the pension, government pension fund, and so on. And then on top of that, yes, they do typically invest your money somewhere, but the returns are really low. They invest it in government bonds or in low return real estate for various reasons I'm not going to discuss today, some of which are sort of legitimate, but they might not align with what you believe in. So again, it's not investment because you don't have a say. If you think I would rather want to invest my retirement money or even my unemployment benefits, I would rather want to invest them differently because I'm not going to need them next year. I might need them in 20 years, maybe towards the end of my career when the world has changed a lot, and I'm willing to take the risk that maybe then it's not a good time to take the investment out or something. Whatever you believe in, you don't have a say. So this is why Social Security is not an investment. It is more like a tax because it has all the features of a tax. You don't really get to say what is happening to it. You maybe are not even a voter in that country, like you're not eligible to vote because you're not a national of that country. And you might not get anything back because you just don't fit the rules, because you're never in need, and similar stuff. So really, you could even say this is all fine, right? I'm not necessarily saying this is wrong. I'm not forcing you to believe that or something. It's really about the fact that Social Security, it has all the features, typically, mostly, most countries, of a tax and not of an investment, a savings account, or similar. There are obviously exceptions. There are certain systems in certain countries that are actually a bit more like an investment fund or something, and a bit less like a tax system. If you take the second pillar in Switzerland, the pension fund, this is more like an investment account. But even that system, actually, it has certain hidden redistribution mechanisms that are not obvious and that they don't really tell you about. I'm also not going to go into detail here, but they're there. It's not like a full investment account. And the same also goes, for example, again, taking Switzerland as an example, the third pillar, which is a bit similar to the 401k in the US, where it is a bit more like an investment account. But again, there are certain limitations and certain loopholes for the government to do stuff with your money that you don't necessarily approve. So I think you have to make that argument that even these systems that seem to be investment account, they often partially have a tax-ish redistribution mechanism, quite hidden, and you typically only see it when things get really bad. And before that, you think everything is great. All right, so we've established Social Security is, for the most part, most countries, exceptions apply, really more like a tax. So you need to add that on top of the tax bill, that the percentage of money you pay in terms of taxes. And this is important. We're not trying to split hairs. The important thing is that you do get a choice. If you think globally, if you compare countries, if you compare setups, you do get a choice. You can actually reduce your Social Security contributions, for example, by moving to a different country or changing to a different setup to causes you care about. And then the third really important, if you will, pillar of actual taxes that people forget, and in this case they're actually even called taxes, but they're still quite hidden, is indirect taxes. Indirect taxes, they even show up on some documents sometimes, like value-added tax. Value-added tax, you typically see it on your invoice or on your receipt if you go to a shop and buy something. And this is also a tax. And specifically, it's a tax that even if you think you pay no taxes because you live in Dubai and so on, you actually still pay taxes, be it because you go to a shop in Dubai and you buy something, or because you go to another country for vacation and you buy something, or you even stay there for a couple of months, you actually end up paying that tax locally. And there's more of that. There's not only value-added tax, there's countries that have a slightly different system, but it's basically the same, like sales tax in the US. Not exactly the same, but very similar. But on top of that, there's more. Many European countries and countries throughout the world, they have a gas tax. So you pay like sometimes really big amount of money straight to the government whenever you go fuel up your car. And you can be 100% certain that. And then there's even more examples, right? There on alcohol, there's usually a tax and so on. The bottom line here is that very often when you buy anything, when you consume anything, and a significant amount of the money you spend in that shop, in that hotel, gas station, and so on, it is actually tax that you pay, not the business. You pay it because you're the consumer. They just collect it on your behalf, but really it's you paying it. It goes straight to the government. Just to give you a ballpark of how significant this is, in many European countries, if not all European countries, if you go to the gas station and you spend 100 euros on gas, half of it or more, it goes straight to the government. It doesn't go to, the owner of the gas station or the refinery or the people drilling out the oil out of the earth. You're directly paying, if you spend 100 euros at a gas station, you're directly paying 50 euros in taxes. And then you can easily do the math, right? How much gas do you buy every month? And then you already know, like, how much taxes do you pay just on gas every month. And this, I think, will easily give you a very, very easily understandable idea of how much additional tax you're actually paying. And then if you do it for the rest of your consumption, like, going to a supermarket, staying in a hotel, getting whatever, a massage or whatever you consume, this extends. So if you factor all this together, your direct income tax, profit tax, corporation tax, etc., the social security contribution, which, as we've established previously, are also mostly more like a tax, less like a savings account. And then finally, the indirect consumption taxes. If you add all of this together, right, you can never do it perfectly and know the exact number down to the last cent, but you can do an example calculation based on your life situation, your country, your consumption habits, just to get sort of a grasp of how much taxes do you actually pay in an average month, in an average year, in total, including direct taxes, social security, and indirect consumption taxes. And I promise you, unless you live only from money from your parents or so, you're going to be shocked. And even if you only get money from your parents as a student or whatever you do in your life, you might still be shocked. You might still be shocked how much money you actually pay to the government every month, every year. It's going to be so much more than this potentially low percentage of income tax you think you're paying. If you want to know more about this, I made an example video of how much tax you really, in the same logic that I just presented, how much tax you really end up paying in Germany, for example, if you're a relatively young junior software developer who is certainly not a rich person, who's certainly not making millions a year, how much tax you actually end up paying. So go check out that other video I made about this, so you get a real life example of the actual numbers and how much tax you really end up paying in Germany as a very middle class, not rich person. If you found this insightful, if you have more questions, maybe if you disagree, maybe if I forgot something, or if you would like me to elaborate on some certain aspects of what we just talked about today, please let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to hear what you guys have to say and to do follow-ups and to answer your questions. Don't forget to hammer that subscribe button, because not only will this tell me that you're interested in more, but you also will get an immediate notification if I have something new to say about all these exciting topics. See you in the next video.